Dear friends, welcome to my channel. This is Taras BEREZOVETS with you. Today is May 9th. This means that, as usual, a parade was held in Moscow today dedicated to the 80th anniversary of the end of the so-called Great Patriotic War. Let me remind you, all of Europe and Ukraine, along with it, celebrate this date a day earlier on May 8th, which is due to the time difference. As is well known, the capitulation of Nazi Germany was signed in Berlin precisely on May 8th. However, due to the time difference in Moscow and most of the European part of the USSR, it was already May 9th. In fact, the issue here is not even about the dates themselves, but about the symbolism. While Ukraine and Europe commemorate the day of victory over Nazism, primarily remembering the millions who perished in this war, Russia celebrates its own triumphalist ideological holiday, which today has become a cornerstone of the ideology of Russism and Putinism. And in fact, it was for all of this that Putin gathered guests in Moscow today. Meanwhile, there has emerged, so far, a faint hope that Putin's so-called 3-day ceasefire might turn into something more. Something more would be a triple-digit ceasefire. This was reported today by both the new federal chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, and a number of European diplomats, quoted by Reuters. Meanwhile, the diplomatic espionage scandal in relations between Ukraine and Hungary threatens to escalate into an even greater confrontation. Ukraine has announced that it has uncovered a Hungarian military intelligence spy cell. In response, Hungary is expelling two diplomats from the Ukrainian embassy. Ukraine has announced the expulsion of two diplomats from the Hungarian embassy. Meanwhile, London has imposed new sanctions against the so-called shadow fleet, and Xi Jinping has urged Putin to make peace on fair terms. Friends, more on all this coming up. So today, the Security Service of Ukraine announced that it has uncovered a spy cell belonging to Hungarian military intelligence. And this is historically, the first such scandal since Ukraine declared its independence. According to the Security Service of Ukraine, the agents were gathering information in the Zakarpattia region. Let me remind you, this region borders Hungary, and a number of nationalist Hungarian politicians have even made territorial claims against Ukraine, stating that these are ethnically Hungarian lands. They claim that these territories should be returned to Hungary. The agents were gathering information about the locations of Ukrainian military forces, air and ground defense facilities, and were studying the sentiments among both the military and the civilian population. One of them is a former serviceman, a 40-year-old resident of the Berezovets district. This is the center of residence for the Hungarian ethnic minority, and his interlocutor is a former servicewoman who was discharged in 2025. She was passing information to Hungarian military intelligence about the presence of aircraft and defense systems in her unit. Both were charged today. The former servicewoman was kept in custody without the right to bail. And as a result, naturally today, Hungary is expelling two employees of the Ukrainian embassy in response to this. This was stated by Hungary's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Péter Szijjártó, who is known for his anti-Ukrainian stance. He accused Ukraine of a slanderous campaign against the Hungarians, allegedly initiated because Budapest refused to supply weapons to Kiev. In turn, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, announced that two diplomats from the Hungarian embassy would also be expelled. In any case, such a scandal will have far-reaching consequences, primarily because a NATO country and a European Union country conducted espionage activities against Ukraine. Ukraine, which is a candidate for accession to the European Union, it is not yet a candidate for NATO membership. The corresponding status has not been granted to it. However, Ukraine is fulfilling the accession requirements. This issue will be discussed once the war in Ukraine is over. Then the relevant prospects may open up for Ukraine. In any case, the scandal is connected to the fact that they are simply spies, but they were gathering military information. And naturally, when the relevant evidence is presented, this will have far-reaching consequences for Viktor Orban's cabinet, which may, of course, deny everything and tell stories about how he knew nothing about it when confronted with the facts. But the fact remains, he will now have to prepare explanations for his NATO partners as well. Meanwhile, Russia is significantly expanding the production of explosives near the border with Ukraine in locations out of reach of Ukrainian drones. Reuters reported this. We are talking about production in Siberia, in the city of Biskoye, in particular the Biskoye reindeer plant, which belongs to the defense company Sverdlov plant. There, they are constructing a facility for the production of RDX. It will be able to produce 6,000 tons of explosives per year, which is enough to manufacture nearly 1,300,000 152 millimeter artillery shells, the main caliber of Russian artillery. Blog. The construction of the plant in Baisk began at the backdrop of a catastrophic situation for the Russian army regarding the supply of ammunition to its forces. As is known, North Korea lent a helping hand to the Russian army by supplying more than 2 million shells, and according to some reports, up to 3 million. In 2024, Russia produced about 2 million artillery shells of the main Soviet calibers, 122 millimeters and 152 millimeters. And it imported from 2 to 3 million, according to various estimates, ammo from North Korea. However, the ammunition produced by North Korean factories is of low quality. Many of them fail to fire or detonate inside the barrel, which leads to injuries and deaths among Russian artillerymen. The project faced significant difficulties that were rooted back when the former Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, was in charge, who is known probably as the most corrupt Minister of Defense, not only in Russia, but I think at least in all of Europe. He was notorious for embezzling billions, and not billions of rubles, but billions of dollars, along with his inner circle. But for that, of course, he deserves a great deal of credit and praise. Because of this corruption, Russia still cannot reach its planned levels of arms production to this day. And such projects, which are extremely long-term and practically gold mines, like the production of the Armata tank, have drained billions from the Russian budget and ultimately amounted to nothing. In other words, the production of the Armata has been suspended as pointless. Meanwhile, Trump has finally called on Putin for an unconditional ceasefire. If he doesn't comply, now Trump himself is threatening him with sanctions. That's why it was no coincidence that Vice President J.D. Vance, in an interview with Fox News, warned the Kremlin that there would be consequences, that the Kremlin's demands are too maximalist, and that they need to lower the bar a bit. Otherwise, there will be consequences. If the ceasefire is not observed, Trump wrote on the social network Truth Social, the US and its partners will impose additional sanctions. He also emphasized this is also a very important policy shift, that they are working together with European partners to achieve a ceasefire between Kyiv and Moscow, which should lead to a peace agreement. At the same time, the ceasefire agreement itself, by establishing a 30-day cessation of hostilities, must be concluded without any additional conditions, Trump stated. And so, in fact, another piece of information emerged closer to the evening, which Reuters reports, citing European diplomatic sources, stating that the US and European allies are essentially finalizing a proposal for Putin regarding a 30-day ceasefire. As an anonymous diplomatic source in the French, Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated, there is not yet a final draft, but it is at the stage where positions are being brought closer together in the coming hours or days. Either a 30-day ceasefire or a partial one may be announced. This is currently under discussion. Reuters also reported that sanction packages are being actively developed in parallel, which the Americans are coordinating with the Europeans. And this is very important. Earlier, the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jean-Manuel Borrell, met last week in Washington with U.S. Secretary of State Mark Rubio, and together with his president Emmanuel Macron, he will be coming to Kiev on May 10th, where a corresponding meeting will take place for further discussions. The new Chancellor of Germany, head of the federal government, Friedrich Merz, who earlier threatened Putin that either he negotiates peace and agrees to a ceasefire, or Germany will provide Ukraine with Taurus cruise missiles, which, among other things, could be used to destroy the Crimean Bridge. He stated that Ukraine and Russia may reach a ceasefire agreement in the coming days. And I very much hope that it will be achieved this weekend, Merz said, noting that it could be tied to the 3-day ceasefire announced by Moscow in connection with the 80th anniversary of the victory. After that, according to Merz, negotiations on a peace agreement may begin. Here, the figure of 30 days was also mentioned. This initiative has already been supported by French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who have prepared a corresponding communique identical to the American one. Thus, we can state the fact that the Allies, on the eve of the end of World War II in Europe, prepared corresponding proposals that have already been thoroughly developed, and this time they are fully coordinated by the Europeans with the Americans. In other words, there should be no contradictions, problems, or rough edges with the White House. And this is the most important thing, friends, the main positive news, which primarily lies in the fact that now the Europeans, together with the Americans, are approaching Putin with a concrete proposal. Either we sit down at the negotiating table and come to an agreement, or if we do not reach an agreement, then we already have a package of sanctions ready. And what kind of package is it? The government of His Majesty has already carried out the preliminary groundwork. Britain has imposed sanctions against 101 Russian tankers and the insurance company Soglasi, which is controlled by the head of Rosneft and Putin's oligarch, Igor Sechin. Yes, the very same member of the Ozero cooperative. According to His Majesty's government, 100 Russian tankers and one more vessel involved in circumventing sanctions have come under these measures. These are used by Russia as part of what is known as Putin's shadow fleet, and since the beginning of 2024, they have transported cargo worth more than $24 billion. Just think about that. The sanctions were imposed in connection with this shadow fleet against citizens of Azerbaijan. Specifically, this refers to Tahir Garayev, Ahmed Kerimov, Anar Madatli, Talat Safarov, and Etebar Eyüp. Sanctions have also been imposed against the insurance company Soglasi, which is controlled by Sechin. And this, in fact, is the very warning, though, that will follow and to which Putin will have to respond. By the way, during the parade, on Red Square, Putin himself unexpectedly took a conciliatory stance. For the first time since 2022, he did not threaten either the West or Ukraine. And moreover, he did not even mention nuclear weapons. In his approximately 10-minute speech, he mainly spoke about the heroism of those who fought in the Great Patriotic War, and only briefly mentioned participants in the so-called special military operation. He stated, "We are proud of their courage and determination, of that strength of spirit which has always brought us nothing but victory." However, an analysis of the dictator's speech shows that this time there were no threats directed either at Ukraine or at the West. And just a year ago, on May 9th, 2024, Putin declared that Russia's nuclear forces are always on alert. And we will respond to those who try to justify today's followers of Nazism. There was nothing of the sort this time. Moreover, in the parade, which involved 1,500 servicemen and 183 pieces of equipment. Almost all of it consisted of old models. Sitting next to Putin were Xi Jinping and World War II veterans, as well as participants in the special operation, including in particular war criminals, one of them with the call sign Struna, who took part in war crimes, and the killing of civilians in Mariupol. They participated directly in the parade. There was nothing new. That is what they showed. The new TOS-2, Tosochka, the so-called new model. Next were the Malva and Gyatsinke self-propelled artillery systems of 152 mm caliber, which were produced on a chassis that is already 20 years old, and the barrels themselves are 40 years old. So it's all old and old. There were no Armata tanks, which have completely disappeared. The tank that Shoigu actively promoted and used to siphon off money has completely failed. There were no new IFVs or APCs either. So everything that was seen was all from a very old generation. And it is also noteworthy that along with Putin's unexpectedly conciliatory rhetoric, Xi Jinping, as Bloomberg reports, for the first time presented to Putin his vision of the need to reach a just peace agreement. Bloomberg and many Western experts unequivocally link this to the fact that although he did not specify what he means by a just agreement, it echoes the demands of the White House and Donald Trump to reach an agreement without any additional conditions. This also echoes the statement he made in March by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, in which he said that all parties to the conflict should strive for a just and lasting peace agreement, which will be binding and accepted by everyone. In other words, this is a case where both the Americans and the Europeans are making synchronized appeals. And this tells us that something really is happening. And the words of both mayors and representatives of the French government, let me remind you, Emmanuel Macron will be in Kyiv tomorrow, all clearly indicate that a very serious attempt is now being made to ensure that Putin's so-called, and I emphasize so-called, in quotation marks, 3-day ceasefire turns into something more. If this succeeds, then it is possible that we will move on to the next stage, peace negotiations. If this does not succeed, and this scenario cannot be ruled out either, then the war will continue according to the old previous scenario. However, escalation is also possible during the summer, as American experts from the Institute for the Study of War have also warned. They believe that Putin will continue to throw in new forces in the hope of achieving a breakthrough at the front, a breakthrough which, as we can see, he has not managed to achieve after more than 3 years of full-scale war. In short, the coming weekend will be extremely tense, but no less interesting because of it. Friends, thank you for watching this video. Take care of yourselves, subscribe to the channel, like, share, and comment on the broadcast. Don't forget to recommend the video to your friends and acquaintances. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to its armed forces. Glory to the Ukrainian Special Forces. Glory to the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces. Friends, you were with the Ukrainian Army Major. This is BEREZOVETS. See you next time. Bye-bye.